Back on News at Prime. United Domestic Workers of South Africa is calling on employers, particularly at this time of the year, to be fair to their domestic workers. The organization says December holidays for some domestic workers come with a possibility of losing their jobs. They are also calling for all employers to register workers with the UIF. Let's speak now to Viwe Mlenzana, Acting Director General for the Department of Employment and Labour. DG, good to have you. And thank you very much for your time. It's been a while now, the requirement to comply, especially when it comes to domestic workers, with the laws and registering your workers for COIDA and for UIF. That's been in place. Why do you believe there is such low levels of compliance with this particular requirement?
No, thank you very much. Thanks for having us in your show. I think perhaps it might be useful to, to start this conversation just by giving this context, and that is that there are about 1.1 million South Africans that are employed in private households. Of these, of those, 854,000 are domestic workers. And what you'll find is that, in terms of levels of compliance within this particular sector, it depends on the kind of labor law that we're dealing with. For instance, if I can just give you a sense, if we're referring to the basic conditions of employment and the National Minimum Wage Act, there's general compliance there. But however, when it comes to the Unemployment Insurance Fund and the COIDA, which is the compensation fund, there are very low levels of compliance. We are looking at about 45% compliance levels with UIF and about, 45% non-compliance, and then about 87% non-compliance with the Compensation Fund Act. So that obviously is a concern, and we think that there is a room for improvement in this particular area, and we do call upon employers, of course, and in this instance, employers are normally people that also work elsewhere, which kind of makes it a bit of a challenge when it comes to compliance in this particular sector.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we have learned, especially, I mean, not putting the two things as the same, but with spaza shops, is that you need to have a strategy for enforcement of compliance. And that's what has now kicked in with the task force as announced by the president. But do you have a strategy for compliance as far as this particular matter is concerned?
Of course. Look, firstly, let's acknowledge the fact that given the fact that it's individual private households that have to register these particular, individuals working for them, the obligation is on the employer, firstly, to comply with the laws. So we are hoping that employers, will take this heat to make sure that the most vulnerable of the workers are actually, taken care of and looked after. From our side, we are obviously having advocacy sessions that seek to inform both the domestic workers themselves and also the employers of the rights and obligations that are there. Are we doing enough? Of course, we can do more. But we must also not hesitate to add that non-compliance with these labor laws do attract some rather heavy penalties that could also lead into employers being prosecuted for non-compliance. If I can just give you an example, last year, financial year, there were a number of inspections that we conducted, and there were non-compliances and variation orders that we issued. And out of those, 14 employers were prosecuted or referred for prosecution. So yes, we'll have to ensure that we do drive compliance with the law. But as I said, we've got to balance this particular equation with advocacy.
So one employee says, look, I am even afraid to broker a conversation around this or to raise the question of registration with my employer for fear that I will lose my job. What's the recourse?
Well, firstly, let me also maybe just add this piece. I mean, we're saying that we probably also have a duty to inform here. And that is that, so the national minimum wage in South Africa suggests that employees should be paid a certain amount of money. Now, in the domestic worker sector, that amount of money that is suggested as a rate of payment per hour is 27.58 rand. So meaning which, if you have a domestic worker in your household, the least that you can pay them is 27.58 rand an hour. Now, obviously, those domestic workers that feel that their employers are not necessarily compliant with their laws, they have an option of reporting that employer at their nearest labor center, or to contact us in any of our multiple channels, either by telephone or through the websites, as it were. But we do obviously hope that employers generally out there, mean to do the right thing, right, and ought to do the right thing by voluntarily, complying with the laws.
There's some employer who might say that I'm not sure whether, the permit that my domestic worker or my employee is currently holding is one that requires for me to make such a contribution. What are the permutations?
Yeah, first of all, yes, you are alluding to a very important subject, and that is that we do, and we have found that a significant percentage of domestic workers in South Africa are actually foreign nationals. And, we must just remind South Africans that, there are certain occupational categories in our country that should be given to South Africans from a preference perspective. And those sort of lower level, semi-skilled, jobs are part of these particular occupational categories that we're talking about. So indeed, we are concerned about these particular, sort of patterns in this particular sector, that there is a significant number of domestic workers that are not South Africans. Now, what we do find when we do establish these particular situations through our inspections, we have a duty to report these through to the immigration colleagues under the Department of Home Affairs, because they've got the legislative responsibility to enforce the laws there. They're not necessarily enforced by the Department of Labor. But of course, it's also important to know that once a domestic worker that works for a household is an employee of that household, they also have rights, and those rights have to be respected, as it were. So obviously, we would want to ensure that the employers actually do, or hope rather, that employers do employ domestic workers that are properly registered in South Africa.
Yeah. So one would say, when it comes to the UIF, and I'm sure we've raised this conversation with you previously, for somebody with means, for somebody with knowledge, for somebody who's technically savvy, many have raised concerns about how unfriendly the interface is. I'm talking about the online interface now to navigate. How are you simplifying that, particularly for a market like the domestic worker group?
So, yes, we have had some challenges in the past with our online services, and we have transitioned, or we are transitioning that particular set of circumstance. We have now onboarded a new service provider, and we're hoping that these glitches that we've been having in that particular sector are going to be the thing of the past. But we are coming up with rather much more better ways of engaging with us, and easier ways of engaging with us, both for the employers and also for the employees. Amongst others, we are coming up with strategies that are going to enable the users of our services, as it were, to access us even from the comfort of their lounges by using technology. And we do hope that we're going to introduce some of these particular measures within the next couple of months, so that it is easier. Of course, it is our responsibility to ensure that not only is it easier to interface and contact us, but it is pleasant as well. We do want to encourage, we do want to, of course, address issues of queues at our labor centers. and we've got some strategies that we are currently deploying to address that particular issue. And we are confident that within a very short space of time, we would have overcome some of those challenges.
DG, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Acting Director General at the Department of Employment and Labour, Mr. Viwe Mlenzana.